Imagine being 32 years old, you are not overweight, you do not smoke, you work out 3 times a week, and one Tuesday morning you wake up with a pain in your chest that does not go away. By noon, you are in an emergency room. By evening, a cardiologist is telling you that you had a heart attack. This is not a hypothetical, this is happening across the United States, in hospitals, in ERs. In cardiology wards, doctors are seeing patients in their 20s and 30s with a condition that used to almost exclusively belong to people in their 60s and 70s. And the question nobody is asking loudly enough is, why is this happening to an entire generation? That is exactly what we are going to answer today. Not with fear, not with panic, but with the reality that the data is actually showing us. Because if you are under 40 or if you love someone who is, this information may be the most important thing you watch this year. Let's start with the numbers, because they are genuinely alarming. Studies now show that 1 in 5 heart attacks occurs in adults aged 40 or younger, a significant jump from just a decade ago, when this age group accounted for only 1 in 10 cases. That is double the rate in a single decade. Nationally, the American Heart Association reports a 2% annual increase in heart disease-related hospitalizations for this age group since 2018. U-Health. And here's what makes this even more unsettling. The overall number of heart attacks in the United States is actually going down, thanks to better medications, better interventions, better hospital care. But in people under 40, the numbers are moving in the exact opposite direction. Something is happening to young people specifically, and it is not one thing. It is a perfect storm of multiple forces converging at the same time. Let's walk through them one by one. The first force is something that has been building quietly for 2 decades, the metabolic deterioration of young adults in America. A study that examined 13,000 young adults from 2009 to 2020 found deeply concerning results. Between those years, the percentage of young adults aged 18 to 44 with diabetes rose from 3% to 4.1%. Obesity rates rose from 32.7% to 40.9%. High blood pressure incidence increased from 9% to 12%. Cooperandins. These are not small shifts. These are massive changes in the metabolic health of young Americans over just 1 decade. And what makes them dangerous for the heart is not just the numbers themselves. It is what they do internally. Here is the mechanism that most people do not understand. When you carry excess visceral fat, that is the fat packed deep around your internal organs, your body enters a state of chronic low-grade inflammation. This state of low-grade chronic subclinical inflammation occurs when tissues are under mild or persistent stress, not enough to trigger full immune activation, but enough to disrupt normal cellular function. Think of it as your immune system stuck in a low-level alarm state 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And when that alarm runs chronically, it slowly damages the walls of your arteries. It makes plaque buildup more likely. It makes that plaque less stable. An unstable plaque is what breaks off and causes a heart attack. JACC. This used to take 60 or 70 years to develop, but when your metabolism starts deteriorating in your 20s, the clock starts early. The second force is stress, and not the kind you journal about on Sunday evening. Young adults who reported higher stress during their teenage years to adulthood were significantly more likely to have high blood pressure, obesity, and other cardiometabolic risk factors than their peers who reported less stress. According to research published in the Journal of the American Heart Association, this is an 18-year study tracking people from childhood into adulthood. The stress was not just showing up in their mood, it was showing up in their arteries. American Heart Association. We are living in what researchers are calling a chronic stress epidemic. Financial pressure, housing insecurity, social comparison fed by social media, the blurring of work and personal life, the anxiety of an uncertain world. These are not just emotional experiences. They are biological ones. Chronic stress elevates cortisol. Elevated cortisol raises blood pressure, increases blood sugar, promotes fat storage, and drives inflammation. Every single one of those outcomes is a direct risk factor for heart disease. Stress does not just feel bad, it physically restructures your cardiovascular system over time. The third force is one that almost nobody was talking about 5 years ago, and it is perhaps the most alarming one on this list. A 2024 study published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that people with microplastics in the plaque clogging their arteries were about 4 times more likely to have a heart attack or stroke than people with plastic-free plaque. Harvard Health. Let that sink in. Tiny plastic particles invisible to the human eye found inside the arterial walls of human beings, multiplying their cardiovascular risk. For a landmark 2024 study found microplastics in 58% of carotid artery plaques examined, more than half, and a 2025 study from UC Riverside showed that microplastics accelerated the narrowing of arteries through a direct inflammatory mechanism without even raising cholesterol levels, meaning this is a separate pathway to heart disease that our current standard risk assessments are not even measuring. Empirical health. Where do these microplastics come from? They come from the plastic bottles we drink from every day, the plastic packaging around our food, the synthetic fabrics in our clothing, The microplastics are so small and so pervasive that they are now in our food supply, our water supply, and our air. The generation of young adults today has spent their entire lives inside a plastic-saturated environment in a way no previous generation ever has, and the cardiovascular system is beginning to show the damage. The fourth force is COVID-19, and this is a conversation that is not happening loudly enough in public health. It is now clear that COVID-19 infections can have lingering effects on the cardiovascular system, including among people with no previous evidence of heart disease. Even a mild infection with SARS-CoV-2 may increase your risk of a heart attack, stroke, or heart failure up to a year after you recover. Harvard Health. COVID-19 patients are unusually prone to a type of heart attack called a type 2 myocardial infarction, where the problem is not a blockage in the arteries but a mismatch between oxygen supply and oxygen demand. Harvard Medicine magazine. Young people who got COVID, many of whom had mild or moderate symptoms, stayed home, recovered, and went back to their lives, may be carrying cardiovascular damage they have no idea about. The heart inflammation, the microclotting, the vascular injury from the infection does not always announce itself. It can be silent for months, even years, before it surfaces as an event. Hundreds of millions of people worldwide have had COVID. A significant portion of them are under 40. We do not yet fully know the long-term cardiovascular cost of this on an entire generation, but the early data is deeply sobering. The fifth force is newer substances that young people are exposed to at far higher rates than any previous generation. The largest pooled analysis to date, presented at the American College of Cardiology in 2025, studied 4.6 million people and found that cannabis users under 50 had a 6 times increased risk of heart attack, even among those with no baseline cardiovascular risk factors, normal blood pressure, normal cholesterol, and no tobacco use. 6 times, for a substance that an enormous number of young Americans use regularly, believing it to be safe. Empirical health and vaping. A 2025 systematic review found that even nicotine-free e-cigarettes caused acute vascular impairments, including endothelial dysfunction, oxidative stress, and increased arterial stiffness. Endothelial dysfunction means the inner lining of your blood vessels stops working properly. That lining is the first line of defense against plaque formation. Damage it consistently, and you are paving the road toward arterial disease regardless of what else you do, right? Empirical health. Now I want to spend a moment on something that ties all 5 of these forces together, because there is a deeper pattern here that the medical community is only starting to articulate clearly. A cardiologist at the University of Oklahoma said it plainly: heart disease does not suddenly appear at 60. It develops gradually over decades, often beginning in your 20s and 30s. OU Health. That sentence should be on a billboard. Because the way we think about heart disease is fundamentally wrong. We treat it as something that happens to older people. We treat it as a sudden event. But a heart attack at 58 is almost never a sudden event. It is the final stage of a process that began 30 years earlier, quietly, invisibly, in the walls of the arteries of a person who felt completely fine. And now that process is beginning even earlier because the exposures are starting earlier. The metabolic damage is starting in childhood. The chronic stress is starting in adolescence. The microplastic exposure is lifelong from birth. The COVID cardiac damage happened to people in their 20s. The vaping generation started inhaling at 16. We are not just seeing older people's diseases moving down the age spectrum. We are seeing an entirely different cardiovascular environment being created for an entire generation, and the heart attacks under 40 are the early warning signal. So what do you actually do with this information? First, understand that your arteries are being shaped right now, today, by how you are living, not when you are 50, not when you feel symptoms right now. The decisions you make about sleep, about food, about stress, about movement, they are writing on the walls of your blood vessels in real time. Second, get your numbers checked. Blood pressure, fasting glucose, cholesterol panel, C-reactive protein, which is an inflammation marker that most standard physicals don't include, but that tells you a great deal about your cardiovascular risk. These are cheap, accessible tests. And for young adults, they can reveal problems that have been silently developing for years. Third, take inflammation seriously as a concept. Chronic inflammation is the thread that connects almost every risk factor we talked about today. Ultra-processed food drives inflammation. Poor sleep drives inflammation. Chronic stress drives inflammation. Sedentary behavior drives inflammation. And the opposite is also true. Whole foods, consistent movement, sleep, and stress management are not just lifestyle advice. They are anti-inflammatory interventions that directly protect your arteries. Fourth, reconsider the substances you expose your body to. The cannabis data is not a moral argument. It is a cardiovascular one. The vaping data is not about nicotine. It is about vascular biology. Your arteries do not care about the cultural narrative around these substances. They respond to the chemistry. And fifth, do not wait for symptoms. One of the most dangerous characteristics of heart disease in young adults is that it is often silent until it is not. The person who feels fine and then has a heart attack at 34 did not have a warning label. The warning label is the data we just walked through together. Here's the reality that this video title promised you. Heart attacks are rising in people under 40 not because of one bad habit or one bad gene or one bad year. They are rising because the modern world has quietly constructed a perfect cardiovascular storm: metabolic, inflammatory, environmental, viral and chemical, and an entire generation is living inside it, mostly unaware. The good news, and there is genuine good news, is that unlike age, unlike genetics, the majority of these risk factors are modifiable. The biology of your arteries is not fixed, it is responsive. It changes based on what you give it. The cardiovascular system has a remarkable capacity to repair, to reduce inflammation, to stabilize plaque, and to recover when the conditions are right. You are not a statistic, but the statistics are trying to tell you something. And the smartest thing you can do right now is listen. If this video opened your eyes, share it with someone in their 20s or 30s who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Wellness Over Time, because this is exactly the kind of conversation we exist to have.